I'm Dr. Amy Thompson. I am so glad that you are with us. I am the program director for the Masters in Literacy and Dyslexia programs. I just wanted to share with you a little bit real quickly about our online degree programs. You can see all of the ones that we have available here. The majority of our programs are fully online asynchronous, and I always like to boast about our great tuition. It's a negotiated tuition rate of $336 a credit hour, and there's no fees on top of that. So that is extremely competitive. A little bit about my program. We are accredited by the International Dyslexia Association. We're the only one in the state of Arkansas and one of a pretty short list, actually, across the country. We have done our initial accreditation years ago. I think it was 2014, and have been reaccredited. And we work with students who are CAUTS, and we work with those who want to become certified through CERI as well. So Melissa is with us from the Technology Learning Center, and she's going to put information in the chat box about how you'll get your credit for Arkansas PD. I'm also going to, at the end, put a link to a form for those of you who need ALTA or CERI CEUs. We are able to provide that as an IDA accredited institution. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about our programs. Literacy or special education, any of the others, what I know, I'll be happy to share. Otherwise, I will send you to that program coordinator. And I want to recognize that Renee Calhoun is with us. All things SIM, I think about Renee and Patty for sure. So Renee, do you want to say anything?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Monica, for being here this morning to present word mapping for us. And it looks like we have a great turnout, which is exciting. I am Renee Calhoun, and I co-direct the Mashburn Center for Learning at the University of Central Arkansas. And we provide evidence-based practices and professional development opportunities for educators across the state. And so just planting a seed with all of you after you participate today. If you're interested in learning more about the strategic instruction model and strategies and routines that can be offered to you, feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email address in the chat in just a minute, but we do have some funding that comes from the state. And so there are going to be some opportunities available to educators at no charge. So again, if you're interested after hearing what Monica has to say today and what she presents regarding word mapping, feel free to reach out to me and we can have a conversation about additional strategic instructional model opportunities that could be available to you. In addition, we provide additional services for co-teaching, inclusive practices, collaborative teaming. So there are other practices and interventions and strategies and things that we offer. So if you're interested in any of that as well, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to have a conversation with you. So I'm looking forward to the morning. Again, thank you, Monica, for being here. And I look forward to learning just like everybody else.
Thanks, Renee. I don't see any other UCA folks that I want to be sure to recognize. Anyone that I'm missing? I don't see any other faculty. All right, so I'm going to introduce real quickly Monica Harris. Monica earned her PhD from the University of Kansas Lawrence. Currently, she's an associate professor at Grand Valley State University, College of Education and Community Innovations in the Teaching and Learning Department, where she teaches courses at both undergraduate and graduate levels. Currently, she is teaching courses in Universal Design for Learning and Disability Studies. Her previous areas of research include working with teachers to implement multi-tiered systems of supports and inclusive practices using explicit instruction focusing on vocabulary. Monica, we are so glad to have you with us, and I am just as anxious as everyone else to learn from you. So I am going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Renee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. When Keith called me a little while back, I was excited to kind of get the band back together again and be part of the SIM professional developments in Arkansas for the Mashburn Center, which I absolutely love. And do they still do the TOED? Is it lick or suck? festival downtown.
You suck, toad suck.
I did not want to mess that up, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, very memorable. So, before we get started, if you wouldn't mind, just to make it more interactive, and it actually helps me feel like people are out there, if you wouldn't mind leaving your video on, unless you have a bandwidth issue, but that really helps the engagement participation, if you wouldn't mind doing that if possible. I'm also putting in the chat the handouts. So I will share a folder with you that has all the stuff I'm going to explore with you, show, have you view, have you work on. But go ahead and see if you can get into the handouts. This may be useful to kind of participate in when we're filling out some of the word mapping pieces. You're more than welcome to play along with it. Let's see. Anyone have any difficulty getting into that folder? Let's see. Make sure. Are you able to see the PowerPoint screen?
Yes, it looks great, and the link works for the handouts.
All righty, super. I'm going to go ahead and begin with an agenda. So here's what I have on the docket. Just talking about vocabulary very briefly, why it's important, and specifically morphological awareness, or what we might call word study. The main focus was to really talk about how we can embed the HLPs, high leverage practices within. So that's going to be a part of this. And there are 3 that we're focusing in. We may not attack them in this order directly, starting with 1 and going to 16. But cognitive strategy and metacognitive strategy instruction, which is going to include the word mapping, and then explicit instruction as we go through the instructional process that comes from SIM, the cue, do, review, and how we embed that within explicit instruction. And I borrow from Anita Archer, the I do it, we do it, you do it. Then we're going to talk more about collaboration and what that might look like with your other partners in the school, a brief reflection, and then we'll have time at the end for Q&A. Hopefully this sounds like what you signed up for, bits and pieces of it. I'm assuming more of an inclusion tier 1 type setting, not so much tier 2 and tier 3, although I will review and go over the word mapping and talk about some of its basic components. But for right now, go ahead. I saw a few things in the chat, what you're doing, or where you're from, but go ahead and let's see, as far as job description, who do we have out there? Are you able to get either the QR code or go ahead and go to the link and send it to this site at Monica Harris? Go ahead and type in Monica Harris 798 and text it to 37607 if you're not able to do the QR. And go ahead and let me know who's out there. Is anyone able to get on here and do the poll everywhere? Your choices are general educator, special educator, intervention or related services person. So a speech pathologist, maybe we have some social worker, maybe there's an administrator out there or two, or none of the above, anybody.
Hey, Monica, this is
Yeah.
Renee. This is what I'm seeing. I don't know about anybody else. When I go to poll everywhere, it says that your presentation is underway. As soon as the activity is active, you'll see it on the screen here. Stay put.
Okay, so it's not looking like it's getting everybody's. Okay, let me see. Well,
Looks like everybody's using the chat though, which is good.
okay, I could pop into that then, if this isn't gonna work the way I'd hope. Let's see, so you're waiting for, huh? Let's see. Oh, a dyslexia interventionist. I haven't heard about that specific. That's awesome. Program directors, nice. Gen Ed folks, welcome. Special ed inclusionary, nice. This is what, good. Some of the early grades. Okay, we'll have some things for you as well. And much of this can be adapted. It is more, you know, kind of like later L and up as soon as we start reading and writing. Let's see. Cool. Thank you. This is wonderful. We call them reading interventionists. So to have it called specifically dyslexia, I like that's interesting. All righty. Thank you for indulging me there. So I'm going to go ahead and pop back into my presentation. So can you see the screen now that says why vocabulary?
Yes, it looks great.
All right, I'm trying to see it where I can see all of you. There we go. Okay, so to begin, maybe you've heard of the Big Five, maybe you haven't. So here's your opportunity. The National Reading Panel essentially called out in the early 2000s these 5 things in the area of reading that need to be addressed, and phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and text comprehension. So given this, I dug deeper into vocabulary and wanted to try to make a dent in it. And especially thinking about when something like this, if you could imagine that several studies have suggested that school children acquire words at the rate of not hundreds, but rather thousands per year. Not several per week, but rather several per day. So with some incidental learning, good readers are going to pick up on these. Those who face challenges can kind of start to get left behind and see a slump. And that's what we call the 3rd or the 4th grade slump. You may see it in the literature where students begin to plateau because we essentially go from learning to read to reading to learn. And that can be a difficult hurdle for some, especially if they have a learning disability or some sort of neurodiverse point of view. What came from one of the important reports of the time from Michael Camille and many of his colleagues was a recommendation for these types of supports and specific instruction, explicit vocabulary instruction, which we're going to do today. The whole idea of direct and explicit comprehension instruction Opportunities for extended discussions. By secondary, motivation and engagement really need to be part of the curriculum, simply for those who have struggled up until this point. It may be hard to get motivated for school. But then the idea of the tiered supports that are out there, whether it's a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, but making sure we're providing students, whether they have an IEP or not, with the supports needed by the specific trained specialist. So the information is there if you want to take that report and take a peeky at it, but it really focuses on adolescent literacy. The next, so why word study or morphological awareness? And there are many studies out there, and I just shared one report with you that support the use of this. And when I did my own lit review on vocabulary instruction, I found that in the earlier grades, early L and so forth, they still teach prefixes and suffixes, and you got your base words, maybe not called roots so much, but by the time we get to secondary, we just assume everyone picked it up, everyone got it, and it's not the truth. So I'm going to share just a couple more studies, and then now we have the Common Core that have been around for a bit. I don't believe they're going anywhere. Many states have picked them up and kind of combined them with their own professional and content standards based on discipline. So you can focus on the Common Core as well that support the use of morphological awareness. In the 21st century, we've had a few studies. One that I did that helped to validate not just the word mapping strategy, but the links routine was used as another strategy in my dissertation at the time. Goodman focuses on a lot of the English language learners and has taken a lot of the things we did with the word mapping and used it with the LLs, which is nice. And then Ganzen, if you haven't heard of Marzano yet, being in the Gen Ed classroom, I'm going to share with you many of Marzano's books and just helpful resources with the way he's helped to put together resources around disciplinary tiered terms. So this is what we're getting into. Marcia Henry, been around for a bit. Unlocking Literacy. She's written a couple wonderful books I highly recommend. But thinking about the English language and how it consists of over 1 million words, as students begin to encounter unfamiliar words in textbooks and literature, they'll be required to make inferences or predictions, right, about the meaning based on analysis of the word's morphological structure and context. So she's been talking about this, using this, saying how important it is for some time, for decades, even before 2007. This was one of her main fights, if you will. Common Core, it's kind of small, but maybe you can see where it talks about word patterns and changes, word choice. Right here, we talk about specialized materials, print and digital, but being able to determine and clarify meaning, it's part of speech. Etymology, that's exactly what we're talking about. Word origin, how to get the biggest bang for their buck with knowing just word part meanings. So how we doing so far? And thank you for the thumbs up. I can see them. I don't mind you asking questions as we go along. I'm not sure where you may be in the journey with word mapping, whether you've used it, maybe you know nothing about it, maybe it's pretty familiar and you're hoping to pick up some more tips and so forth. But we're focusing on the high leverage practices that come from the Cedar Center, along with Council for Exceptional Children, CEC. And collaboration is the first one with professionals. And so we're going to spend time thinking about how we can do that using the strategy. Cognitive and metacognitive strategies, as I mentioned in the agenda, and then the explicit instruction pieces all through this presentation. So maybe you've heard of Hattie, John Hattie. He does a lot of meta-analyses, if you're familiar with meta-analyses. And he has several books, but Visible Learning was the one I first picked up and highly recommend it. But he has thousands of meta-analyses that he's gone through. And to look at, let's see, if you're familiar with effect size, all right, when we get in the literature, you don't need to know all the statistical analysis, but know what is what is a good effect size. And here, Anita Archer pulled these together, and you can see what seems to be working with students. Now, what's a 0.11 versus a 0.6 or a 0.7? So here's the barometer that Hattie has, and he talks about a hinge point. So you got negative or reverse effects. It can go negative below 0, okay? We probably don't want to use that or make major tweaks. Then we get into 0.1 going up higher. The more we get closer to a 0.4 and over, that's the breaking point. That's what he calls the hinge point. Anything over that is worth a try and probably some good stuff. All right. So if I go back, you can kind of look, where do we get past the 0.4? Really about right here. So everything on the left-hand side is worth giving a try. It's evidence-based practice that is getting bang for its buck. Okay, so some of these things we're going to talk about today, and when we get, they're all part of the SIM model and the stages of instruction. Teacher clarity, reciprocal teaching, that's something that might be done. Here, feedback, so important. Our metacognitive.
Well, I mean, it's not like they're gonna get.
I'm sorry? Direct instruction. Did someone have a question? Or if you like to add something to the conversation, I don't mind this kind of being more of a two-way street than a sit and get. So take a peek at these. Let me know what you think. I highly recommend paying attention to the effect size. So let's go on to our first HLP we're going to get into. Here's the definition of what is a cognitive or metacognitive strategy, but it's essentially helping students through the thinking process, that thinking aloud, the troubleshooting, how to even, think about storing information. So strategies, using them, also self-regulation. Are you just completing something real quick and turning it in without any reflection or reviewing? Or do you actually take a moment and review what you've done and evaluate what you've just done? So those are all part of this metacognitive. So thinking about thinking, if we break up the meta and the cognitive. So that little
Miss
voice.
Monica,
Yeah.
somebody asked a really good question in the chat box. It says, what would be an example of student self-verbalization? Can you pause and hit on that for me?
Yes, absolutely. From the very first thing up here, it's like in the SIM strategies, I think it's step 4, the whole after modeling, verbal rehearsal or elaboration. So when they talk about what they're doing, when they explain what they're doing, when they verbally recall and memorize list of things. Does that kind of help a little bit what verbalization is?
For me, it did. I'm not sure about the person in the chat, but yes, thank you so much for elaborating.
Okay, let me know if I didn't finish it or you have other questions. Please do put in the chat. So part of this, I would say with the metacognitive strategies, there's a lot of verbalization going on in the way we communicate with our peers, with others, ask questions, reinforce, repeat, those sorts of things to help us memorize items and to, start with some working memory, but put it into long-term memory.
Monica, we have another question here.
Yeah.
Oh, it disappeared. Somebody was asking about how executive function played into this.
Executive function, I would say, would be a major part of it because that's helping you to make decisions around how to go about completing a task, how to attack it, how to evaluate it, that sort of thing. So does that help? It's really helping to give a process for executive functioning for vocabulary.
Yeah, so their question, it showed back up again, was how would executive functioning affect this strategy?
I don't know if it affects the strategy. I think the strategy helps you to use executive functioning in an effective way. If you have issues with executive functioning, let's say neurodivergent with ADHD or autism, I think it's going to help those students with the process and a format that they can use, grab hold of, and make their own. Does that kind of help? Am I getting to the question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, good. No, good questions. So what we're going to focus on is I'm going to take you through a quick, brief kind of review of word choice because it is so important. And I think this is a great part where a special educator and gen educator and interventionist, paraprofessional, who's ever in the classroom can help do these things. Okay. But choosing words, what are the high frequency word parts? We're going to do the describe, the model, and then some practice and feedback, which will take up the bulk of our time, okay, this morning. So first, I want to introduce you to Isabella Beck and colleagues' idea of tiered vocabulary and word choice. This comes from, I believe, Bringing Words to Life, which they do a great job of bringing all the studies and bringing them to bear in vocabulary and how to do it in elementary, middle school, and high school. They give good examples of each. But tier 1 are basically sight words. These are terms that students should pick up incidentally unless they're learning a foreign language, unless English is not your first language. Then language teachers, you're probably going to spend a lot of your time in tier 1, okay? Everyone else, content area teachers, special educators, interventionists, so forth, you're going to spend time around tier 2 and tier 3 words and a nice balance of those. And tier 2 are your high frequency terms. These are your, bread and butter. These can stretch across the curriculum. So they're just not in a social studies classroom. They're down the hall in the English language arts. They're in the art classroom, that sort of thing. They may have a little nuance to them, but this term is general and goes across the curriculum. Tier 3 are content specific and very contextual, and students who are accelerated, who do well in class, they're going to pick these up, okay, with some practice. What I mean by a nice balance of tier 2 and tier 3 is probably a 70-30 percentage. 70% of your terms, say you have 10 terms, 7 should be a high frequency, a utility term, because these are going to help students get over the bubble. Okay, the kids who are may find it difficult to pass on some way. This is going to help get them over a bubble with maybe 2 or 3 of the terms that are considered tier 3, very content specific. Really, you don't use them outside this content area. Place fewer of those because the students who need to know those, they'll learn them and they'll get them. Questions about the tiers. So in your handout, there is how do we go about eliminating tier 1? Okay, so we're going to say we're not language teachers, we're content teachers, or we're helping out a content area teacher. We're in their classroom collaborating, co-teaching together. How might you go about deciding what is a good tier 1 term that we can just cross off here? Because we want to stick mostly with the tier 2 and tier 3. So if we were to take number 1, and we'll just do a couple of these together, but what do you think about representation? How might representation, where might you put that? And you can just drop it in the chat. Is it more of a tier 1, a tier 2, tier 3? Where would you put that one? Based off the definitions. All right, seems to be pretty hands down. A couple of 3s, which it could be for some, but I would put that in a nice tier 2. You could see that going across in a social studies or histories course. You could see it in algebra. You could see it in visual arts, maybe a little nuance, but representation could be used in other content areas. So nice, nice. What about weathering? Think about weathering. Let's just settle on maybe this is 8th grade geography, some sort of, no, physical science, I think is what it is. So it might even be a 9th grade course, kind of in between. What are you thinking? I see 3s. It is specific, you're right. And this can be tricky. Now, this process we're going through is very subjective. Okay, it depends on your students, and you know your students better than I do. So one of the things we decided as we were talking about it, as if you think about the term weathering, most students know what weather is by 8th grade, right? Middle school, high school. To weather something, weathering, this could probably be described with a quick little brief sentence, okay? Which then would probably make it a tier 1 term. If you showed a picture of weathering, talked about it brief moment, I don't think this would take some explicit instructing in it. So we could take this off and represent it in other ways, okay? Now, I'm not arguing that it isn't a tier 2, but in general, we thought there are other ways to represent this, so we may not have to teach it. Now, the lower grades, maybe you do, okay? What about geomorphology? What do you think that is? So a few of you are thinking a 1 or a 2. Yeah. So this one right here, geomorphology, number 3. Okay, yep. See some 3s going in there. I agree. Totally a content-based term. Okay, you're probably not going to see it much outside of this physical science course. Let's see, Mount Vesuvius. Now, this brings up a whole nother interesting question around which word should we explicitly teach as a vocabulary term versus just another important key concept or term that we need to know. Okay. What do you think about Mount Vesuvius? Go ahead and drop a few in there. All right, I see some 1s or 2s, 1s. Yeah. Yeah, the interesting thing about names of places, things, pronouns, people, those sorts of things, proper nouns, I should say, not pronouns, proper nouns, is that word etymology may or may not work. It typically doesn't, okay? So we would mark this one off and find a different way of representing it, okay? So we can go through a few more of these, but I think if we were to continue this conversation and just for saving time, I would say dome is something that tier one, we wouldn't need it. You could talk about that and show a picture of it. Most students know what a dome is by the time they're in middle school or high school. It might just need a quick reminder if they do not. Convergent, divergent, those are great tier two terms. Plate tectonics, now that's a tough one. Tectonics, I think, is a good tier three. But there could also be another way to represent this. So I'm going to show you some of these. And then we just went through mudslides. You may not need volcanoes, crater lake, proper noun. So I'm going to just share with you, and most students know what an earthquake is. So if students know a term or a concept, we really don't need to teach it explicitly. Okay, that can become intrusive. And so that's another reason why it's important to pre-test and make sure we're really individualizing and getting the majority of the terms that students need to know instead of waiting just to post-test. So here's what I mean by, well, maybe there's a better way to represent the word. We talked about volcanoes, we talked about domes, we talked about different ways of representing a certain term and then showing specifics like Mount Vesuvius or Crater Lake and some of these other things. So this frame is a great way to represent a lot of information without having to give an explicit definition that may or may not do the trick. Okay, so adding something like this can definitely help to categorize terms. So once you get your key terms, you get rid of the ones that are all tier ones and you feel good, you got a nice selection of 10 to 12 terms, which for a typical unit, literature supports, ESPN has done a lot of research around CBMs and using vocabulary to predict content knowledge. And so using something like a quick 10 to 12 word vocabulary.
On mute, sorry. What the Sigma? Sorry,
would be good to do. So here we have a nice representation of tier one and tier three terms. And then once we did that, we then decide, okay, and you could take it a step further and say, okay, I'm going to use for these certain terms, we're going to have word mapping. And again, it's subjective. You want to focus on certain things. And we're going to get into what specifically that might be. But just as far as word selection, and then if you're familiar with the vocabulary linking by Ed Ellis, that's another great strategy that if word mapping does not work, which it'll work for about 50 to 60% of your terms because they lend themselves to word etymology and they come from Greek and Latin roots, which the English language is kind of Haydn's 57 of the Romance language, some Anglo-Saxon and Greek and Latin. And Marcia Henry talks a lot about that. So maybe we have some terms then we're going to use with vocabulary linking because they really don't lend themselves to the word origin or word mapping. So this is just another way to start thinking about being very deliberate. I mentioned also plate tectonics, how it's an important concept, okay? And everyone's not just going to know that, especially the different types of divergent and convergent. So this concept comparison table is another way to then dig deeper and unpack a lesson or unpack this term through a lesson, all right? So just giving you ideas that having kids look up definitions and write it in a sentence, we know that does not work alone. Definitions alone do not work. We need context, we need strategies with it, and I would argue some etymology and word mapping. So after we start thinking about word choice and we can decide if it's a tier 2, tier 3, now we want to think about the high frequency word part. So how do we know we're really getting to the bread and butter and what's important? So this link takes you to the crash course in word mapping. It's just a quick and dirty handout. I'm going to go into the steps a little deeper with you, but if you go to the back side, and this is, I also have a handout in a folder I'm going to share with all of you as we're going through this that has the meanings. It goes a little deeper, but in the late 80s, White and Sewell and Yangiari did a study, and they found out that of all the prefixed academic language in English prefix terms, here, these are them. This top around 20 of prefixes and then the suffixes. These roots did not come from that study. They came more from Marzano's work, but these are highly kind of core high frequency roots that you might see across the disciplines. Now, Marzano has also gotten into the disciplines and said, hey, in geology, here's the ones. In, history, here's the one. In civics and different disciplines. So if you get into Marzano, you can, and I'll share some of those titles with you. But you want to spend time here, because if you can get students to not just recognize and identify these, but to attach meaning, it's really going to open up word meanings and predicting unknown words as they're reading. Okay. Let's see. Any questions out there or what we're talking about with high frequency? It's just bigger bang with their buck, especially by the time they get to secondary. All right, so let's get into the word mapping. You probably have some of these in your handout. Here's the mnemonic, maps. And this is what we're going to do. Map the word parts. We're going to attack the meaning. We're going to predict based off of those word meanings. And then we're going to see if we're right. So here would be a typical word map. And I think in your handouts, you either have these electronically or if you just want to jot down on a piece of paper. But I'm going to walk you through, just quickly describe what we're doing. So let's take the word prediction. First, we're going to write the unknown term up in the top box. Then we think about how do we map it. So now we're dissecting. Now we're pulling it apart. Okay, and I have some tips for deconstruction, but this is how typically we recognize bits and pieces. Good readers see parts and they immediately go to those parts. So if we were to break it down this way and then add the meaning to it. Now there is, and I'm going to share with you in a folder when we get into the basic classroom model. I'll share the folder with you and what's in it. There's a list of, it's not an exhaustive list of all the prefixes, suffixes, and roots, but it's a good place to start. There are other places like dictionary.com. You can use Merriman's dictionary, etymology.com. There are different places you can find meanings when needed that give word origin and break it down for you. It's a good check on student work and what they find. So once we attach meaning, We then go about making a prediction. And when we make a prediction, we start with the center, the root, which is known as the heart of the word, has its most meaning. We then look and see, is there a prefix? Because the prefix can add to or change the meaning of the root word. Then we need to look at the suffixes, and the suffixes, a lot of them seem to mean the same thing. And what I notice is that they seem to kind of set the stage for describing the word, as far as, is it a process, a state of something? Is it a tense? Is it based off some sort of, well, depending upon the language, it can identify a gender, that sort of thing. So I usually start my sentence, because if you look in dictionary definitions, it'll say the act, the process of, the style of, whatever it is, state of. So I'll start my sentence with this, but I really look to say or speak before. So maybe the act of speaking before something, right? Speaking before. And so if I have that, that's my prediction. Now I want to make sure I'm at least in the ballpark, okay? And if we go to the dictionary, something known before or foretold. So are we in the ballpark? Yeah. Is it exactly right? Might need some massaging, but you can see, especially if we're guessing between terms or items, we could probably get it right. So that's how each of the steps work. So here are the tips for deconstructing. Okay. Now the strategy has, it has all different lessons. First of all, for teaching prefixes, if your students really know very little about prefixes, I highly recommend going through those, using those cue cards. Then it's suffixes, then onto roots. So there are lessons designed for all of those high frequency ones. And you can kind of tweak them, make them their own, but focusing on the high frequency word parts is what it's about. Okay, so I'll share some of the ideas around that and how you can use some of the materials that are in the manual to tweak them, especially if you're in an inclusive setting and it's not a resource room, or more of a tier 2, tier 3. Let's see. So you're going to look for good readers. They look for known parts. They look for words they already know in a term to help figure it out. And they also notice that not every word has a prefix, suffix, root. Sometimes it's a root that can stand on its own. Sometimes it's a prefix and a root. Sometimes a root and a suffix. Sometimes they're compounded. You might have 2 roots and a suffix, or a root and 2 suffixes. So for example, audiology, looking to see what we know, ology, audi, and going from there. So going back to, this is my favorite, to bite off the biggest chunk. Once you have identified a word part you know, or you know it is a prefix or suffix, bite off the biggest chunk. All right. Sometimes instead of just doing DI, which is a legit prefix, okay, if we took diverse, students may know the meaning of diverse already, so we don't need to break it down anymore. Now, if your goal is to teach DI, okay, maybe it is a math or a, biology course in which this is an important prefix that needs to be learned, then yeah, go ahead and break it down further. Sometimes there's extra letters left between in word parts, and that's just the way they're conjugated, especially with the root and the suffix. Okay, sometimes you get these loose vowels hanging on. We just put them in parentheses to hold that space. It doesn't have meaning, but it helps you put together the term. Okay, helps you spell the word. And then sometimes word parts have more than one meaning. You know, dis has like 3 different ones. Not, I think, apart and away. So there's different meanings, and sometimes we have to play around with them to get closer in the ballpark. So a couple of examples. Here's one about biting off the biggest chunk. We could break resolution down to re and solu, but if we know what resolute already is, let's just keep it together, okay? And focus on ION, which is a high frequency suffix that students should probably get familiar with. Judiciary, here's a good example of where there's just a vowel hanging out there. It could confuse folks. So let's just put some parentheses around it. It really holds no meaning or will change anything about the term. Illuminate. Kind of same thing. IL means not or into. Okay, and those are really different. So this is when it's important for students to play around. You have ATE, which is cause or make, as a suffix. So how might we do this? Okay, and you have a couple different choices of how to play it. Any questions about those tips for deconstructing? Yeah, that slide, print it out, keep that by the side. I think it really helps to troubleshoot as you come across words and students are asking questions about how to dissect them. How we doing so far? All righty. Okay. Thank you. I see a few thumbs up there. So that's a metacognitive strategy. It tells you how to think about words. It gives a real succinct process. It's operationalized. And so what we call a routine in a way. But explicit instruction, we're going to drill down even more. And this gets into how students, again, go about learning material, how they go about thinking about starting, planning, preparing, and evaluating a situation, an assignment, or how to use specific skill sets. If you click on this one, this is a form that Doctors Lancaster and Fisher, who, when they were here at Grand Valley, Paula's at Central Michigan now, Joe's still here, but this kind of combined the explicit instruction with the cue, do, review, the CDR, all right, which is part of Tier 1 instruction by Keith Lentz, The Frame by Ellis. Janice has done so much around cue, do, review. So this is something you can use to help you pace yourself, and maybe you do some observing or you're working on supporting others, mentoring. This is just good practice. My pre-service teachers were actually doing this week. They're putting together a strategy of their own, and these parts need to be there, but it's all part of the explicit instruction. All right, but using it in the cue, do, review pieces. And so this is yours to take a look at, and maybe you want to keep it on the side because I'm going to go through maybe a model of how to use the word mapping in an inclusive gen ed type of setting. We'll assume that students may have been introduced to this strategy already. A special educator knows it and maybe taught it to her students that are on her load in this class, working with a general educator or an interventionist of any kind. Okay, let's see, go back here. So hold on to that. And now let's just look at real time in the classroom, okay? Reading happens, whether it's on a web page, laptop, textbooks, Do you guys remember textbooks? Hard copies. They were these things we had back in the day. Anyway, so get your textbook, whatever source, maybe it's a module, okay? But students are going to need to read something. So one of the things we're going to do is first queue up, kind of review. So I'm in the queue up the lesson right now. All right, if we were to walk through this. So kind of go through the checklist and we can talk afterwards what I missed, what I did, what questions you might have, okay? But kind of maybe observe, evaluate me. So the first thing we're going to do is to review the lessons from previous session. So I might say something, all right, folks, remember last time we did this frame and we were talking about the formation of rocks. And during the week, we've examined metamorphic, igneous, and today we're going to get to the sedimentary. All right. And so some of the strategies were graphic organizers. We're going to continue with a graphic organizer, and we're going to use the word mapping strategy to help us dissect terms, to predict the meanings of the words we come across that we do not know. All right. So we can make a better educated guess. So just to review quickly, igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary. Now look at the sedimentary in the terms, what we have here. These are the types of rocks we're going to get to examine in class today. Right here. So, when we read, here's a couple of pictures, but who would like to take the first part and read? We know what sedimentary rocks are, but let's go ahead. Now, teacher talk. Some of these terms, yeah, like categorized and so forth, you may immediately say, all right, that's a tier 2. We're learning that one. Humor me, we focused on the content of the rocks for this one, but I think you see where you could probably take some tier 2 and tier 3s of your own, depending upon the grade level, okay, of your own students. But we'd walk through, we come through, someone reads perfectly all the way until they get to this lithification word. So we're going to look it up. So everyone can go ahead. We'll click on this. There's a link and we look up lithification. Process by which sediments are consolidated into sedimentary rock. Now we've been talking about sedimentary rock. That still doesn't give me a lot of info, a lot of meaning. So let's go ahead and maybe we should try mapping this one out. So right now I'm doing a brief describe. Okay, I'm letting everyone see what we're doing. Students may have had this. Some students, this may be totally new. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, is there any word part that you see? If we were to map this out, are there any parts that you know already? So someone might say meant, area at the end, right? They notice the suffixes. And what I found out in my study when I did the dissertation is that students in later and secondary and even freshmen high school, they're great at identifying prefixes, suffixes, and roots, but they have no idea of meanings or how to attach meanings. So then that leaves us with SETI, which is the main root. So now we're seeing 2 suffixes, which is totally okay. It's called a compound suffix. It just, the word has 2. So now we're going to use our vocab list and go ahead and attach meaning to it. And as soon as I finish this one, I'm going to share the folder with you so that you can see some of the list. Excuse me. So once we look up these terms on the high frequency word list, we'll attach these meanings. So set, meaning to sit or settle. So remember what we do when we begin to make a prediction. We look at the root, which is the heart of the word. Then we move to the prefix. In this case, we don't have one. So we can just use the term sit and settle. But now we need to kind of think, okay, what's the backdrop? So how should we start our prediction? And I'm going to say it's the process of sitting or settling. So the process of sitting or to settle. And then once we look it up, we can get a little more detail than just what the glossary told us or the dictionary. And now we know a type of rock formed by material deposited by water, wind, or the glaciers. So this is what we're thinking about. We might even add a little picture there with ELLs. This is what Amanda Goodwin did in her study. She had them create a sentence and add a picture. So kind of like the links vocabulary, if you're familiar with the linking strategy. Questions about the process, just a quick describe there. And if you engaged and went along, wonderful. Because now we're going to go back and continue reading. All right. So once we know lithification, we feel better about it. We can see the lithification in some of the pictures of weathered rock debris. Now here's that weathered term, which is kind of something we can describe. And you can see the weathering up in the top picture with those mountains, those sedimentary rocks that have been layered and then weathered. So lithification is a term we're going to want to get to know. First, weathering, we might be able to do with just a picture and a brief description. Okay. So with lithification, and here we'll do more of a model. So now we get into the I do it, we do it, you do it. So I did the describe. Now the model. So let's take a peek and get ready. And before I do that, let's go to I am going to share this folder with you all. I'm going to drop it in the chat. You are going to have these resources. Now there's several in there. Don't go crazy right now. We'll just get through them little by little here because you'll have a chance to do what you'd like with them. But let me know if you're able to get into the folder, because what I want to share with you, you got your handouts. We're going to go to high frequency word parts. And then there's also this word mapping, prefix, suffix, and definitions. So either one of these will work really well. I like this one just because the way it's sorted. So we could begin to use this to create an awareness for the meanings of these prefixes, suffixes, and roots, the word parts that students can identify as they dissect and deconstruct words. All right. So if we go back to lithification. Now, lith is not going to be in here. I'll give you that. So let's go ahead and, whoops, not the one I wanted. Let's go down to, sorry to go all through this. All right, here we go with lithification. So are there any parts? Go to your prefixes first. Are there any prefixes, anyone? And you can put it in the chat. Or if you want to unmute and say what you see. Are there any suffixes that might be familiar to you, or you know, hey, this is a suffix. I see this a lot. Holly, thank you. I see T-I-O-N. That's an oldie but a goodie. And you're going to see A-T-I-O-N, T-I-O-N, or just I-O-N. All right, a lot. So let's go ahead and map that one out. If I can get back into... Shoot. Trying to get the presentation. It won't let me down there. Trying to get in presentation mode, folks. Sorry, it's my little arrow's not letting me. All right, there it is. Hooray, I found it. Okay, here we go. So lithification, we got the ATION in this case. Okay, we could have done TION. All right. Anything else anybody sees in there? And this might be part of a root. If you go to the roots, you might see something like the FIC or FAC is one. If you go to the roots. So this is a compound root. Lithy is very science-based. It's not a high frequency one, but you will find it in the sciences, and science people love their own special term, own special word parts. So once we start thinking about attaching meaning, action, state, or quality for ATION, and then lith means stone. And then the FIC, or it may be FAC, FIC, is to make or do. All right. So if these are our word parts we've attached, now we're going to make our prediction. Does anyone remember where do we start when we make our prediction? The root. Yep. Yep. With the A, B. Holly, your question about the A, you could. However, ATION is it's high frequency. Okay, you could do that because it really doesn't change or add to the meaning. Okay, but you'll see A connected to it a lot. So, yep, start with the root to make stone, the action or state of making stone. All right, somewhere you finesse and massage and work out a prediction. Now we look and see how close are we, and a process by which sediments are made into rock. Now we've already talked about sediments, so we know what that means. We've dissected that word. We've mapped that one. One of the things that is cool to do, I've mentioned this one already, but I want to go to, my favorite is this dictionary.com. Unfortunately, it seems to get real addy lately, but let's put in lithification. Now, we're not looking for the definition here. What we're doing is we're going to bypass the definition, okay? And we're going to look for the word origin. So you pass down through a few things. Ooh, it's right here. And see how nicely it breaks it up, so we can click on lith or lithy. That I's all by itself, really doesn't have any meaning. So parenthesis would go around that letter. And we go down to word origin, not meaning. And we can see it means, let's see, maybe I need to click on it to find it. Well, I guess it's the third combo here, meaning stone in this case, the variant. Okay, this one has several depending upon the content, but the one we're taking here is with stone. And then you got to see the other, how it broke into the prefix, I'm sorry, the suffix quite a bit here. And I believe it breaks it down further with the word origin. So dictionary.com does a nice way of breaking everything down so that you could see it. TION, conjugating FY, FI, sometimes Y, sometimes I. So dictionary.com was the whole point of going through that with you. as one of the sources to go through. The next thing we do after getting through is probably showing some lithification, okay? This idea of making rock into stone and the whole weathering piece, right? So now we're getting pictures of weathering, because I don't think for my 8th graders or 9th graders, might be some 10th graders in this group, we're not gonna dissect weather. I think they can get this by brief conversation and showing some pictures of it. All right. Let's see. So now we continue reading. Okay. And I see other good words. Probably transport's a good tier 2. All right. If students did not know the meaning of it, this would be a good one to break down, do map. We get around abrasion might be one we come across, but for this unit, we focused on the rocks. So conglomerate is the next one. So we can look up, not now, we're not going to look up meaning. We're going to see if we can map this one. So now I've described one with sedentary. We're now modeling that one. Now we're going to do some practice and feedback with it and give you some verbal practice here and enlist your participation more. So is there anything in this word you might see, and you can just drop it in the chat, that looks familiar or you might know or go, that's a high frequency word part? Anything in there? This is a hard one. This doesn't have a lot of, all right, somebody sees the C-O-N. Yep, good. Con, definitely. C-O, C-O-N. With or together. We see the A-T-E at the end. Good. That's definitely one of our suffixes. So now that's kind of leaving us with this root, what could be put together as the root, right? So we get conglomerate, we got our con, we got our 8, and then that leaves us with this glomer. Okay, not a high frequency, but in the science classes, this is something we want to know. So now we attach our meaning. So you can look at that word list. I guarantee it's not going to have the root glomer, but C-O-N-A-T-E, help me out there. What's C-O-N or A-T-E mean? Anyone find with the word list the meaning? Or if you want to go on dictionary.com. All right, I see together. How about the ATE? Any ideas on the ATE? How we can provide meaning? And this is one of the high frequency ones. So this will be a common one. You know, students, you can build word walls to help them get the high frequency prefixes and suffixes that you're learning that week. All right, I see state of. Thank you, Leslie. So with or together could be the C-O, C-O-N. Quality or state of. Beautiful. All right. Now, is anyone finding anything about the glomer? You might have to go on dictionary.com because it's not on the word list. But if anyone's, or take a guess, just knowing what a conglomerate is. Anyone want to venture? So if you were to go ahead and look it up on dictionary.com, or it might even be in a glossary of some sort, it's a grainy or ball-like thing. So help me out here. We start in the middle with our root to make our prediction. Then where do we go? Start with the root, then we're going to what? Oh, good. You got the small mass so forth. Yep. Go to the prefix. Thank you, Holly. This will change or add to. I think we're going to add to it. So it's a grainy ball-like with, let's see, it's a ball-like substance with kind of grainy material. So that's the main piece. Then I'm going to go to the suffix to start the prediction, to kind of lay the backdrop. So I'm going to say the state of a ball-like grainy substance that's all together, something of that nature, quality of a grainy ball-like mass together. And some of you found the gathered in a round mass. Kelly, nice one, nice one. So then we look it up and we're going to get something like this. All right. And we're in the ballpark. So thoughts around this? Do you understand the process? Thumbs up? Maybe, because I do have some kind of foundational pre-skills things that we might need to know. All right, I'm getting a few yeses, and it's really about the process. Thank you, Rachel. I see your thumbs. Yeah, Amy, the process is really like slowing students down to a crawl so that when they're reading, they come across a term they don't know. What we want to get them to is fluent, get them to fluency and starting to break it down, deconstruct, and map it out. So much that they won't have to write it out and use these organizers anymore. They can just do it in their head. That's where we want to get them to. Okay. So thank you for that. And if anyone's ever heard of Anita Archer, I mentioned her earlier because she did all the effect sizes, made up that slide with all the effect sizes from Patty. But I remember we used to call modeling the heart of instruction. All right. Seemed to be very important. And I remember when Mike Hoke, who's the author of Possible Selves, we were having conversations around this, and he was really going back and forth. Is it the modeling that's most important, or is it the practice and feedback? And what we found over the years, and he sides on, it's the practice and feedback that's most important. And unfortunately, when I go into classrooms, that's what's done the least. A lot of describing and modeling kind of put together, I see. And there may be some practice, but you practice on this worksheet, you hand it in. So the feedback's neither immediately, it may or may not be instructive, okay, depending upon how we're assessed or evaluated. But it's more about the practice and how we give feedback. And the majority of time should be spent doing that. So it's kind of like I do it, maybe I do it again, but then it's we do it, we do it, we do it, we do it. So it's like 80% of the time is spent on the practice and feedback, the we do it, whether it's guided or independent. We're going to talk about independent here in a moment. But really, practice should not be sent home. It can be, but you need to do some things in the classroom as well to give that practice and feedback. And so when we get into collaboration, we'll talk more about how to make that happen. So with the review, here's what you want to do. We now want to talk about what was learned, why was it learned, and where it's to be used. So if we were to review, I could ask, so what strategy did we learn today? We love Anita. Me too. What strategy did we learn today? Anybody? Pop it in the chat or unmute yourself. Word mapping. What's it for? When might we use this? When would we use this? When might we use this strategy? All right, to better understand concepts, new vocab, yep. Introducing new terms, yep. It's really about, I like the prep before reading. It's really about creating awareness and helping students to predict the meanings of unknown words. All right. And we're going to get them to crawl first to then get them to walk and run. So where might you use this? I guess some of these might be. We might use it as prep before reading. When else might we use this strategy? Where? Ah, I like it with language learners. Absolutely. And don't forget the visuals. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, can convey meaning immediately. Use it in my car with my own kids. Yep, yep. May as well give it a whirl. Small groups, yes, and we're going to talk about that. First graders can do this. They can. They know about breaking up parts. There's also in the manual what we call memory cards. And I would recommend with the younger folks, probably the memory cards would work well. And I can show a picture of that. Nice, nice. Yep, yep. All righty, folks. Thank you for that. So, review and independent practice here. Let's see. Did I have? Let me see. There were some terms I wanted to show you. Now, are you supposed to get a break? Are we supposed to do a break? Because I'm looking at the time and we've kind of been sitting here a bit. Huh, I didn't put it there. Darn it, where'd it go? All right, we're going to go ahead and do this as a review. This is the longest word. This is the longest word. I had a different one, but this one's super long. So, there's a word for you. It's a real word. Go ahead and have at. Where would you start? Good readers, pick out parts they recognize. Anything you recognize. Yes. Amy, I was blessed to be mentored by a what do you call himself? Self-proclaimed word nerd, and started class off with just putting a humongous word on the board, and students even and dissecting it and using this, and then students even trying to mess him up by giving him a word. They'd use the dictionary and have him tear it apart. All right, look at all these parts we see. Yep, yep, there's a lot of volcano, micro, yep, mono, ultra.
Monica,
Like,
say
yeah.
that when I use this with that kiddo, I put this word up and his first comment was, "You expect me to read that?" But when he broke it down by parts he knew and looking at syllable types and how to break things into syllables, he could read it. And it was the most amazing thing when he realized, I can read that word.
It's very empowering. For sure, for sure. So here's the parts with the actual meanings, okay, that can be connected. And this is from a science book, but you can see the bits and pieces, and roots and prefixes can kind of be interchanged depending upon how they're conjugated. So this is a fun one. The other one is the anti-establishmentarian word. There's like 15 different parts to that one too, but that's a smaller one, and that's usually what I start things off with, and that's a fun one to do too. So let's see. All right, folks, you ready to move on to collaboration? We're in the last leg of this journey as far as the yes, Holly, that's the word right there. Anti-establishmentarianism. Yes. So how do we go about doing this in class to support all students and the success, right? Their success in the classroom. And so I'm just going to briefly talk about, I'm going to show you co-teaching models. If you're not familiar with the co-teaching models, please do. These various models really help. Who is it? Friend and Cook. You can look up Marilyn Friend and Cook. They do a lot on this good stuff. Wendy Morosky also has a lot of good stuff. Co-planning teaching guide. I'm going to share with you an actual teaching guide that you can use. All right. And I have my pre-service folks do this, and then they actually plan and put one together with a strategy. And then an activity, what it might look like. So these are the models. All right. You got your one drift, one teach, one observe, which I kind of call novice models. That's when you're first getting your feet wet or getting to know a classroom or a teacher. But then the instructional ones would be the team teach, the parallel teach, alternative teach, and station. Highly recommend. If you just Google this, you can Google co-teaching models. You can get a lot of information on how to go about doing this. Then there's the co-planning teaching guide. This might even be a Friend and Cook thing. Let's see where this came from. I love this thing. And you just type and write right on it. Although when it's made into a Google thing, it's not as friendly. The Office of Curriculum Instruction and Professional Development. And you can see how this fits nicely with the different co-teaching models. You got a nice setup for objectives, standards, materials, what are the scaffolds. So a lot of good thought, planning, and discussion goes into this when two people are having this conversation. So this template can set you up for success. And how do you want to go about teaching? A strategy even, and it focuses on what we're going to do before the lesson, during, and after. Just good basic practice. You could even, I have them write in the cue, do, or review is how they do this. Cueing, and then doing and reviewing. All right, and then the teachers, and if there's 3 people in the room, you can add another column, do it with 3 people in the room. Okay. Questions about any of the around co-teaching, and then this using this planning guide, which can be a real blessing if you struggle to get things started, and who's responsible for what, and what's my role, what's my responsibility. Are we good? Well, if that's the case, let's go ahead and click on this handout. And this is just something put together real quick. You got your observation checklist as well, because you might want to break up. Maybe somebody's doing the cueing, maybe another, you tag team it on the doing, right? With the content and the how to, and then the review could be done by one of the teachers, adults in the room, okay? So that one person, what we want to get away is the content expert, the gen educator, doing everything. The special educator, the interventionist can help do a lot of the pre and the wrap up kind of thing. The advanced organizer, and then the wrap up. Sorry, give me a sec here. Okay, just to make sure I can get into everything. So let's talk about this. And maybe I don't have everybody in the room, but the general educator, special educator, interventionist, or ancillary supportive service folks, administrators. So now we have the skills and demand going along the vertical here. What are they responsible to? And I just took a stab at some of these things. I'm looking for your input, okay, and how you might add to this. Are you guys able to jump on this? Or here, let me see. Am I sharing it? Yeah, looks like anyone with a link. So I'll drop it in the chat if that helps people. Go ahead and you can get on this. but then looking at the HLPs that might be embedded. Now, there are more than just this 3, but who might be focusing on these? And I can see everyone focusing on these: administrators, collaboration opportunities around instruction, right? To give supports to your teachers will be a major piece, making sure they have their planning time together and maybe time to go get additional PD, those sorts of things. Kind of skipped around here, but I see the general educator, and help me add to this, or if there's other verbiage around this: access to discipline and curriculum. That's the main thing, is to help their students master the content. Okay. The special educator is about teaching the strategies. Now, it can be done in combination, but typically the gen educator or even the interventionist, they're the ones with the strategies, with the toolbox, right? Toolkit. So help supporting practicing is so important. I can see speech and language pathologist, some other type of interventionist really helping out with the practice and the feedback. Okay. I'm reading one of the comments. Christy says she's not in the content classrooms. Wow. So is it a rule that you're not in the classroom? Or, I mean, is everything pull out versus some pushing in? Or I don't know if you want to give some context to it, Cindy.
I teach, I have a specific reading class. It's we've identified those struggling readers. And so I have an actual class period. So I teach 6 classes a day with those struggling readers. So I'm trying to help them build strategies, of course, but I would love to be able to apply it to some of their content area, because I work with 9th and 10th graders. And next year we'll move up to 11th graders. So it's I don't have much trouble getting information from the English teachers, but my science and history, it's really difficult to get what they're teaching so that I can help them with like hands-on practical applications with what the students are actually dealing with.
Yeah. So I guess one of my first suggestions might be is to begin a conversation with one of the teachers that seem like they're flexible in this way, that they would be easy, good, fun to work with, or just having a communication around, hey, I know the strategy. This is something we're working in my classroom. I notice a lot of my students are in your classroom, in your science room or what have you. Is there a way that I could help support them and support you in teaching the strategy or learning the strategy? You know, so it might go all the way from you being very engaged in the classroom with you coming in and actually helping to deliver instruction, all the way to maybe you just have a poster with maps on it listing the steps, and ask the general educator, hey, you don't have to know the strategy, but my students know it, and all they need to do is be prompted to use it when they come across the word they don't know. And that might be enough to get them intrigued. If they let you hang something in their room that they could use, it's not giving away any answers, but you're going to get other kids asking about this and want to know more about it. So that might help, you know, build a tipping point to where you get invited in, or who knows. Does that help a little, just off the top of my head? Thank you. Good. Anybody else? Let's see if they share lessons in Google Docs. Let's see, share docs with you. Does your district have curriculum? You could look online. Michelle, I'm not really sure. Is it more of a
I was just suggesting that for, pull-out teachers, sometimes it's not that the general ed teachers want to leave you out of it. It's just that we're all kind of overwhelmed in our places. So if your district provides a curriculum map online that shows you generally what they're working on that month, that's something that you could look at. You could ask the teams to include you on their Google Doc to share. So it's, it's not necessarily that people are leaving people out. It's just, everybody's overwhelmed. So.
And Chris, thank you for adding that in, or Michelle, thank you for adding that. And it's true. Everyone is overwhelmed. Everyone's kind of doing their thing, trying to make it work. So yeah, by building that relationship and just asking, that's a great idea. Thank you, Michelle, for adding that. Anyone else questions around it? And Debbie, your point, sometimes they are guarded. That's why you need to find the one that gives you a little, you can get your foot in the door, right? You can find that lever, okay? And yeah, I don't know many of the other platforms. Google's one of the main ones we use, so I don't know about a lot of the other platforms. Does anyone else have any ideas of other ways to share documents or get information to people around curriculum mapping and what's done where? So maybe if something pops up. So to continue with this map or with this handout, just getting us to think about, and if you're familiar with the different tiers of instruction, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, I'm not sure what Arkansas uses, a tiered model, but up here in Michigan where I am, we have a 3-tiered model. More of the universal support, targeted supports, and then the third is the intensive individualized supports. So who might be doing what level of support, right? And then I added in the Q do review, so you could decide even, who's going to be doing the majority of what. So I don't know if anyone has any comments or if there's anything else you'd like to add in here. And if I'm missing anyone, I love the interventionists and supportive related services, of course. Any thoughts, any questions around the Q-Do review and how to review the lesson? So how did I come back on my explicit instruction feedback? If I go back up to this observation checklist here, was there anything I really missed, or does anyone have any questions on the steps as we went through there on the pieces and the parts? Don't be afraid, I can take it. I don't mind some constructive feedback. Or if there's something that wasn't explained very well, or you want to revisit. So I did it perfectly? That doesn't happen very often, if ever. Questions then, if anyone has any questions or thought about using the handout. Thank you, folks. I hope you use it. I hope it's worthwhile. So looking at the time and being mindful. Thank you, Debbie. We're not here to judge. I'm going to review a couple things in the folders, but if you just want to kind of jot some or just think about, you don't even have to write anything. How might you collaborate with others to deliver a cognitive strategy like the word mapping, okay? And explicit instruction in an inclusive setting for those who do get into an inclusive setting. And then the other one you can take a peek at and think about is how might you integrate vocabulary instruction, specifically this strategy, into the classroom. So one's more process and then the other's thinking specific content. What might it look like? And you can drop something in the chat if you have a little pithy sentence or two. Or a deep reflection if you want to unmute and talk about it. think about it. One I always like as well is, how is your thinking shifted or changed around vocabulary or explicit instruction and collaboration since the beginning to now? Has anything shifted or changed? Are there things you might do differently, perhaps? Kind of big picture. I plan to use this, Melissa. I plan to use this with new vocabulary, but also when the class, gets stuck, we can stop and word map. Let's map it. Let's map it out. Everyone can have an organizer, a graphic organizer, one of the maps, and just really getting them to crawl, then to walk, and then get them to run with it. Let's see, what else do we have here? Good. PLC planning. Perfect. Now we can make sure we're getting a nice core, especially around the word selection. That's a fun activity to do with your co-teacher or special educator and gen ed interventionist get together. Practicing including feelings so that everyone can. Trying to read a couple of these, Jessica. In addition to modeling, there needs to, yes, practicing and including failing. I'm so glad you said that, because we learn from our mistakes. Okay, quite honestly, things I do well and get right, I don't remember that as much, but the things that I failed or made a mistake, I remember that. Okay, and you try to correct it and change it. Good. Everyone learns differently. Collaborate. Thank you for that. Rachel, I think SPED team, we could all, work together in teams, PLCs, groups, partners, what have you. Excellent, excellent. Thank you for sharing some of those. Break them down, the difficult ones. So here are a couple, and go ahead and keep in the chat. Here are a couple of the resources I mentioned. Marzano, disciplinary folks, these books help. He really did a great job of looking to see what are the high frequency terms, what are the ones I always come across in chemistry, what are all the ones in poli-sci. I mean, really broke these down. And then even the Common Core, the standards helping to use it. Let's see, who else? Whoop. Worth its weight in gold. Archer and Hughes, from our own Charlie Hughes from the center. And then you all seem to know, many of you, Anita Archer. But here's the I do it, we do it, you do it. So many great examples how to do explicit instruction. So, I have from one of our SimPDers, Lifer, Pam Leitzel, she shared some tips for word mapping. This is a cool place, the Keys to Literacy. You just fill something out real quick. They're not gonna harass you or anything with your email, but you can get free templates. Excuse me. So a couple of resources there. Can you see the collaborative folder with all the sources I see? Ooh, sorry, folks. So in this folder, start with these targeted terms. These are those high frequency word parts. Use these. This is fun. If you go to the manual, this was made to kind of get you started, and it goes through, here's the manual, goes through the worksheets first to make sure students know what each of these things are, and then gives the specific terms or word parts with some examples and the meanings. So prefixes come first. Now, this handout is wonderful because this gives lots of practice. You can kind of do group A, maybe 1, I do it, you do it for a little bit, then 3, 4, all the way down to 10, we do. And you can do some guided practice in groups. You can do some other things to make it more engaging and not individualized work, but guided. And then maybe the last 2 have them do on their own. Okay. But these identifying the word parts, and then it moves on to the suffixes and so forth. So this is great for just helping students create awareness and get to know the strategy. We got the roots. This general template. Feel free to tweak this as you'd like, to add the terms you'd like, but this is coming, it's adapted from the manual. This is more of a tier 1 situation, I would call it, versus 2, which the manual is more supportive and targeted with smaller groups. Here, it's about pre-teaching. Okay, find out, these are the important word parts, the meanings, but what terms might you find? And you can come up with your own examples and your own reading put into this space to make come to life and have them practice these word parts with your content. Okay, and with AI these days, you could throw in, hey, I need you to make up an 8th grade reading level paragraph or short paragraph with these words in it. AI does this for you. You don't have to think it up anymore. Use it for that kind of stuff. And then just the other parts, here's where we break it up. And again, I do it, we do it, guided practice, and then the you do it, more independent. Okay. And then just to practice predicting. So this is a template to get you thinking about how maybe you could introduce a lesson and do a lesson in a content classroom or an inclusive setting. So I see some information, valuable information that went into the chat from Mashburn folks and Sim people. Is there anything else in here? Have fun, look through these pieces, take it and use it to the best of your health. And I think that's all I have for you. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions, big picture.
Monica, do you care if I chime in for a second? This is Renee.
Not at all.
It excites me as I sit here and I listened to what you presented, because in the comments that were made, because the summer PD sessions that are being offered through UCA will only continue to build upon word mapping, other routines that Monica mentioned, like she showed a frame, a visual device or a graphic organizer, and she mentioned the framing routine. She had the concept comparison table up there. There were lots of things that were embedded, QD review, where there are going to be upcoming sessions throughout the summer that will reinforce those topics. So I want to encourage you, if you like what you heard today, what you saw, to come back to the other sessions, because it will continue to build your knowledge with an evidence-based practice and a model. Also, co-teaching was mentioned quite a bit, and I love the template with the QD review built in. And that is something that we provide support from at the Mashburn Center for Learning. And a lot of the comments that were made, I was sitting here thinking, oh, this is such good information, because the strategic instruction model and co-teaching are a great marriage. And we would love to get that word out there and be able to support schools in marrying those two models together. So if you're interested in that, I earlier put my phone number in there and my email, reach out to us, because again, we have some funding through our state, through DESE, that will allow us to provide professional learning for teachers in Arkansas in both the strategic instruction model, which is what word mapping comes from, and also in the co-teach model. So I'm just saying, I'm so tickled. I was just sitting here just thinking this is amazing because it's a great foundation and kickoff for the summer series. So I want to encourage everybody to come back because we're just going to continue to dig deeper into some other evidence-based practices. That's it for me.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you. That warms my heart, feeling your excitement. I also dropped in my email in the chat. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always excited to talk about this, and it's my pleasure. Thank you, folks. Appreciate it.